Michael, thanks for being on the program. It's great to visit with you. And I should say, in the spirit of full disclosure, that you and I have known each other, shall we say, for a while.
Yeah, I guess it's been going on 15 years, something like that, Warren. So thanks for having me on. I'm honored to be with you.
Yeah, no, it's a great pleasure. And in fact, I'm hoping that maybe we can do this on a regular basis. We'll see how this goes. But yeah, I wanted to start, Michael, just by talking to you about your job and your role at the Dispatch. I want to sort of expand the conversation and talk about the Dispatch as well. But what do you do at the Dispatch, and what's the mission of the Dispatch?
Yeah, so the Dispatch has been around for going on 6 years now. It was founded by Steve Hayes and Jonah Goldberg. And for folks who are familiar kind of with conservative journalism in the last couple of decades, Steve came over from the Weekly Standard, which was shut down, much to his chagrin and the chagrin of many others on staff, obviously, and readers too. But came over from the Weekly Standard. He had known Jonah, who had been with National Review for, I think at that point, a couple of decades. And so it's during the first Trump administration. A lot of kind of the political grounds were in flux, I guess you could say, particularly on the right at that time. And they saw a real need for serious journalism to be done on the political right at that particular time. And what they were looking for, I mean, you look at publications like the Weekly Standard or National Review, those publications are probably known as much for their commentary as they were for their reporting, though the Weekly Standard did more straight reporting, or maybe what you'd call traditional reporting, I suppose. The National Review tended to do, but they saw the need for serious journalism on the right. Not to say that the journalism is skewed to fit a particular narrative, or preferred policy outcomes, that sort of a thing. But just meaning that the journal, like rigorous journalism, is performed seriously by people who are coming from a conservative disposition or who have a worldview that comes from that side of things. Conservatism, and I don't know, we might talk about this a little bit more. Conservatism has gotten to be sort of a flexible term, I guess you could say, in the last 10 years. That was part of what was going on when they started the Dispatch. But conservatism, as we use it at the Dispatch, is really kind of a classical liberalism, believing in free markets, robust civil liberties, a strong national defense, but believing in the benefit of having a strong national defense as the United States, really trying to go back to the ideals that we see as animating the founders of the U.S. So the Dispatch was started to try to achieve those things. We are committed to fact-based journalism and reporting. We do feature a lot of commentary and analysis, and probably some of our most well-known writers, like Jonah or Kevin Williamson, Nick Cataggio, others. They're writing commentary or analysis, um, but they're doing so grounded in facts. A lot of the stuff that I spend my time doing as a managing editor is working with writers who are doing reporting. And sometimes the lines get blended between opinion and what we might call straight news. And that's a whole nother conversation that's worth having at some point too.
Sure.
But I spend my time working with reporters who are covering Capitol Hill, who are covering currently the Trump administration, before a few months ago was covering the Biden administration, covering when it's campaign season, like we just came out of, covering campaigns on the road, talking to voters, talking to political operatives, and trying to be honest about what's going on in the country. By virtue of my own background and personal interest in some of the needs that we have, also manage a weekly newsletter called Dispatch Faith, and really kind of head up or lead or coordinate, I guess you could say, a lot of our religion coverage in general, which, um, you know, being conservative, we think plays a fairly large role in any of the big conversations we're having in the country or outside the country about any of the big issues we face.
Yeah. Well, I want to say, I want you to say a little bit more about that. I was going to observe that the Dispatch is not an explicitly religious or Christian organization, but it's certainly um, what I would call faith friendly. And you've already mentioned the Dispatch Faith that you do. The Dispatch Faith, I'm sure you're working on it all week long, but it shows up on, as part of the Dispatch product, most obviously on Sunday, whenever there's a daily newsletter there. You are the curator of that content and you write some of it. Sometimes there might be transcriptions of interviews that you've done, but often it's written by others. Can you talk a little bit about how you put that together, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, it's a weekly newsletter. Um, the main kind of main feature of it every week, I guess you could say, is usually an essay or a piece of commentary. So sometimes it is more reporting, but typically written by someone outside of our company. I'll usually do a little bit of introduction to the piece and the writer, but the main event is that particular essay or piece of commentary. We've played with some other features as well. We'll always try to excerpt other stuff that we think fits with Dispatch Faith, stuff that touches on religious topics or issues that we've published on our website. We'll throw those in there. I have done at various times, I've done YouTube interviews and podcast interviews with either writers who are featured in the newsletter or just folks who are in the news or have something to say about things that are going on in the news. So sometimes links to those interviews are in there. Been experimenting lately with shorter form kind of Q&A style interviews with certain people. Those seem to have done pretty well. Um, and then I also try to throw some interesting reads toward people as well. So if you're interested in, I don't know, longer essays about a religious issue that touches on broader news, I will try to throw those in there and give folks a taste of what those pieces are, and then link back to whatever publication publishes those. So just trying to give people kind of a well-rounded understanding of. Sometimes it's stuff it's on the news, it's in the news cycle, as we've had the last couple of weeks with the death of Pope Francis and now the election of Pope Leo the 14th. Sometimes it's off the news and a little bit kind of bigger picture stuff, but just trying to give folks, readers, a good sampling of stuff that's kind of in the zeitgeist when it comes to religion and faith. So to your point, it does take me all week, or often I'm working on a particular issue a couple weeks in advance when it comes to commissioning pieces or working with writers. I'm usually the one who does the edit on the main piece, so I'm working with writers all the time about, what kinds of things would they want to address, or what kinds of things do I want to address? Who's the best writer to go do that sort of a thing, and then just working through the production process.
Before we dig into a couple of specific stories that I'd like to talk about with you, Michael, and in part because I'm interested in the stories, but in part because I think it further illuminates what you do there at the Dispatch and with Dispatch Faith. I'd like to back up just a bit though and talk about Jonah. One of the things that I've and sort of some of the things that you do at the Dispatch that I think is different from other publications. One is the reporting component of it, which we've already talked about. But a lot of commentary publication, or a lot of publications, both on the right and the left, are driven more by commentary, famous names, than they are necessarily by boots on the ground reporting. And one of the things that I've appreciated about the Dispatch is that you guys have real reporters. I mean, you've got commentators as well, but even their commentary is often driven by reporting. The other thing that I appreciate about the Dispatch, and I'd like for you to comment on a specific example that happened this past week, is that you're not afraid to really dig into a topic. We sometimes talk about long form journalism. I don't think I've ever seen a better example than Jonah Goldberg's essay this past week. It was, I actually copied and pasted the article into a Word file just so I could see what the word count was. And it was right at 9,000 words. It was about 86 or 8,700 words, which is way longer than you would see almost anywhere else. Even publications like The Atlantic would only rarely publish an article that long. Can you talk about that article and that willingness to write uh, an article or publish an article that long? And also, too, an article that's 8,000, 9,000 words long takes a long time to write. I mean, even if Jonah's just sitting there cranking it out at 100 words a minute, it's going to take a while to write. So walk me through the process for how an article like that gets published.
Yeah, every piece is a little bit different, so this isn't necessarily how they all go. But I will say first with Jonah, Jonah is kind of a singular entity, all his own. And if you listen to his podcast, The Remnant, or read him regularly, and he has a newsletter um, publishes twice a week called the G File. He's also a syndicated columnist in the LA Times, and that gets blasted out to a bunch of different newspapers. Like if you and he's a commentator on CNN and elsewhere frequently. If you get a little bit of time with Jonah, reading or listening or watching him, you will soon pick up on the fact that Jonah is singular, and he is prolific. And he's singular in his prolificacy, I guess you could say too. So having a piece that's upwards of 8,000 words is not necessarily normal for us, but one of the things that I appreciate about the way we do things is we're not afraid to, I think, as you put it, we're not afraid to sit down with an idea or a topic and really play it out. A lot of the reason that Jonah and Steve started the Dispatch was because, particularly Steve, felt like so much journalism now is just about kind of advancing the story a quarter of an inch and getting this micro scoop. And there are a ton of news organizations that do this, particularly in Washington, D.C. And I won't go through all of them, but so much of what we think of about American journalism now is advancing the story a quarter of an inch, and then 8 hours later, the story's blown by where it was when you thought you had it. And what that does is it makes it hard just for your average news consumer to grasp what's going on. The other thing it does that none of us thinks is healthy is it kind of makes you a slave to the devices that you're carrying around, whether it be your phone or a tablet or whatever, and always watching for the latest push notification. And none of us thinks that that's a healthy way to kind of go about our lives. We spend enough time on our screens and on our devices. So a lot of what animates what we do is wanting to take the time to explain context, um, and try to be explainerly as much as we can, so that people don't feel like they've missed the story when they come to us. And Warren, you've written for us too, and so like I probably drove you crazy with some of the ways that some of the questions I was asking at times when you've written for us too. But we're all the time pushing writers to, okay, unpack that a little bit more, unpack that a little bit more, which is not normal because usually editors are saying, we're going to cut that. We don't need that. We're going to cut that. And we do that. Um, but it all goes to kind of the ethos that we operate with, which is that we're going to help readers understand not just what the news is, but why it's the news and why it matters.
Yeah, and in fact, I probably should have said earlier, as a matter of self-disclosure or appropriate disclosure to our audience, I have written for the Dispatch. I've been on your podcast, and and just using my story as a case in point, I think I turned in probably something over 3,000 words. You guys published something over 2,000, maybe 2,500 words. So you did cut, but you also added. In other words, I would say that the article that y'all ended up publishing, probably did cut 1,000 or 1,500 words out of the one that I submitted, but you also asked me to add some things that you felt like were missing. And I was grateful for that. I mean, I think, I've been a writer for a long time. I've been edited by people for a long time. I don't get my feelings hurt anymore. And unless I really think that the article is being made worse by the changes that are being recommended. And then I might, stand up a little bit and say, hey, listen, I understand that this needs to be shorter, but you're really making a worse article out of it. But I'll have to say that I think in this, and Michael, you were my editor on that story. You and maybe one or two others. I don't know who else, but I know I dealt with you. In my opinion, the article was made much better because you guys pushed back pretty hard, and because we didn't rush to publish that article. on a date certain. I mean, if it needed an extra day or two or three, we took an extra day or two or three to get it done. And I'm grateful for that. Let me go back to Jonah's article, though. I mean, Jonah is, kind of the boss. I mean, to what extent does Jonah submit himself to that editing process? Does he turn in 9,000 words and say, you guys got to publish it one way or the other?
Not, no, not at all. Jonah's totally the opposite. Jonah refers to every now and then will do something that he thinks is funny, or he'll take a little bit of issue with, but he'll always go, well, my editors say this. Well, Jonah, technically are your editors, but you sign our paychecks, buddy. But no, Jonah totally submits himself to that. And in fact, there have been a handful of times when Jonah has come back and said similar things to what you just said, Warren, that the edits really were made the piece better, or you caught this. I needed to, excuse me, unpack more, explain more. And those are kind of the badges of honor when Jonah comes back and says, great edits, this makes the piece better, which is the point of editing. The point of editing should be making the piece better, not about, throwing egos around or throwing elbows around, which I think sometimes are misconceptions between writers. But no, Jonah, that piece is a really great example. I think I wasn't the primary editor, I was a secondary editor on that piece. I think when that piece came in, it was 8,000 words or somewhere thereabouts, and Jonah was saying this is too long. So find places to cut. The other editor and I, the other editor who worked on it, and I made some suggestions for cutting, but there are also some places that felt like there needed to be a little bit more, help us see what we're talking about here, help connect some of these dots. And then the piece did end up growing to that point. But Jonah is trying to address in that piece kind of what I alluded to earlier. What is conservatism actually? And the word gets fumbled around a lot in the current political discourse. But that's one of those things where, again, like so much of what we want to do is to try to unpack the issues that are underneath the surface. And so, what is conservatism? Does conservatism just mean getting along with the political right in the US right now? Does conservatism mean something that is a little bit more foundational? Jonah gets into all that stuff in that piece, and we just felt like it was an important thing because we even in casual conversations find ourselves having to caveat when we say we're conservatives, having to caveat what does that mean in 2025 anymore?
Yeah, exactly. By the way, I'll put a link to that article by Jonah Goldberg and I'm embarrassed to admit, Michael, that I can't. I'm sitting here looking at the link, but I can't see the title of the article. It's "Don't Call It Conservatism." Is that what it's called?
Don't call this conservatism.
Yeah, and I'll have a link to that article in the show notes for today's program. Well, let me. I'm going to. I know we've got a limited amount of time, but I want to make a couple more pivots here, Michael, and see if we can get into some other issues. One is the to talk specifically about the government. I think I'm going to take a pass on Pope Leo right now, to be perfectly honest, because you mentioned Pope Leo. Y'all covered, that pretty extensively. Y'all had a lot of articles about that, and I actually respected and appreciated those articles. But I wanted to talk about the Oklahoma City or the Oklahoma charter school case that is now before the United States Supreme Court. You had one of your writers, Andy Smerick, write about that, and I have really a couple of questions about that. How would you, number one, how would you characterize your coverage? Was Andy's article, would you consider that reportage? Would you consider it commentary? Did y'all take a position on that case or not? And then also, I would like to, well, let me pause there. Talk about that article and sort of where that article lands in the reportage commentary continuum.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to get, kind of technical about it, I would call it analysis, but it's based on, I mean, Andy's analysis of the oral arguments for that case, and just for listeners who may not be as familiar. So this was a Supreme Court case that the Supreme Court heard earlier this month, I think on May 1st, or perhaps it was the end of April. But basically, Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma, is defending itself from a challenge in court where a Catholic charter school is trying to operate and use state funds to operate a Catholic charter school, Oklahoma is trying to come back and say we don't think that a Catholic entity should operate a charter school, since charter schools are kind of an extension of the public school system. If you're having attorneys listening to that, they might scoff at that. That might be a little bit too reductionistic of a way to put it, but that's essentially the case at hand. So Andy Smerrick's piece was really, it's analysis. He's getting into his read on the questions that certain justices were asking and the way that the attorneys arguing the case, the way they answer those questions. He's trying to read sort of the way that the Supreme Court justices might end up ruling in that case. So it's analysis, but I will say I think it's pretty indicative of the kind of stuff that we have on this. It's analysis, but he's recounting the actual testimony, or he's recounting what's actually being said during oral arguments at the Supreme Court. So it's not a take. We don't like the word take, hot takes and cold takes. We don't really go for takes that much. He's using his experience as a court watcher and as a legal analyst to get into how he thinks this is going to shape up before the court.
Yeah, well, that I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but that was exactly my take on what you guys did. That it was heavily driven by reportage. I mean, yes, it was analysis, but I would say, in fact, if you were just going to read one thing about that case, and I've read a lot about that case, that would probably be the one that I would recommend that people read, as opposed to, I mean, just to give our listeners some contrast. I wrote an editorial about that case. I believe that it is a bad idea for charter schools or for Christian schools to get government funds, and I said so explicitly, even though there were some facts in my article. It was driven by some reporting. In fact, I actually reached out to a couple of experts in Christian education and asked them some questions, and and put their answers in my article. I think my article is really more an opinion piece. Y'all's article was more an analysis piece driven by reportage. And that's one of the things that I really appreciated about it. It also, one of the other things that I appreciate about that article is that it gives me an excuse to note that you guys have just acquired SCOTUS blog. And SCOTUS, by the way, stands for Supreme Court of the United States. SCOTUS blog is arguably the leading Supreme Court watching publication in the country. It complements the coverage that you guys have already done, because you were also doing some great coverage. Talk about that acquisition, why you wanted to do it, and how you think it'll maybe change the landscape for both the Dispatch and for coverage of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. So yeah, the acquisition of SCOTUS blog is kind of it's a big deal for us. I don't know if it's a watershed sort of a moment, but in a lot of ways, it just made so much sense for us, and we're grateful to have the opportunity, I guess the ability with our growth over the last few years to be able to pick it up. So SCOTUS blog is one of those publications that's been around for a long time. It is respected by people on the left, people on the right. It's just an all-around fair and accurate player, and trying to do kind of what Andy Smerrick tried to do in the piece that we were just talking about. Just take a straightforward look at what's before the Supreme Court. And if you go to SCOTUS blog and click on any case that's featured there, I mean, you will get a quick rundown of the requisite background you need. You'll get links to the actual filings and case documents if you want to go so far as to do that. But if you just want to know the general background on any particular case, or what to expect in upcoming oral arguments, or maybe what to expect when ruling season comes up, which we're about to get to the Supreme Court, SCOTUS blog is kind of this universally respected source for all that stuff. Attorneys read it. I remember, I mean, when I was doing more in past points of my career, when I was managing reporters who were covering the Supreme Court, SCOTUS blog was like the place to go to get the quick rundown on a particular case, so that I knew how to direct reporters and what the salient things were to watch for. So that's SCOTUS blog's reputation. That's its bread and butter. When the opportunity arose to acquire them, it just made all the sense in the world for the Dispatch, because again, we want to base everything that we're doing in facts and rigorous reporting. Even though we have commentators and analysis, it's all based in what's actually happening. So it just seemed like a match made in heaven for us to be able to pick up SCOTUS blog. And they're a pretty lean operation. They have been a lean operation. We're really excited about some of the things that SCOTUS blog is going to be able to do if they've got some of the resources that we can bring to bear, both with the personnel we already have on staff. If folks who are familiar with David French and Sarah Isger, um, who host a very popular advisory opinions podcast that we do. We have other court coverage in our other editorial products. It just seems like it all fits together so well. We can help SCOTUS blog out and giving them more resources. But the name of the game for us with this thing is we want SCOTUS blog to keep doing what it's been doing. We don't want to come in and make wholesale changes. We're not making wholesale changes. We just want to free SCOTUS blog up to keep doing that kind of stuff. And there'll be cross-pollination between our site and theirs to some degree, but just keep SCOTUS blog doing what SCOTUS blog's always done.
Well, Michael, listen, we need to land this airplane. So let me just say in closing, thanks a lot for being on the program today. Thanks for your personal support over the years of me and also your encouragement regarding the work that we do at Ministry Watch. I know I've certainly followed your career now for, like you said, for 15 years with great excitement and admiration. And I'm really excited about what you're doing there at the Dispatch. And I sure hope we can do this again in the near future. Anything in closing you want to share with our listeners before we bid adieu here?
No, just that I appreciate all that, Warren. I appreciate what you guys do, you and your team at Ministry Watch. I guess the reason that you guys exist, the reason that we exist, is just believing that it matters, that the truth gets out there in hard, sticky circumstances, and that's what we're committed to. That's what you guys are committed to. I think that's why we work so well together. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Blessings, Michael. Take care. Have a great day.
Thanks, Warren.